So, picture this scene for a second. You are walking down the street and, up ahead there is this massive dog.
Oh, yeah, like a Great Dane or something.
Exactly, a Great Dane, a Mastiff, just something that genuinely looks like a small horse, right?
Yeah.
And standing directly in its path, completely unbothered, just utterly holding its ground, is a Chihuahua.
Right.
A dog that weighs maybe, I don't know, 5 pounds on a heavy day. And you've probably seen a moment just like this, and if you're like most people, you probably laughed and thought, wow, they are just born with a gigantic
It's
attitude.
basically a stereotype at this point.
Yeah, exactly. But the core mission of today's deep dive is to explore our source material on Chihuahua development to uncover a really surprising truth. That fearless attitude. It is absolutely not automatic on day one. It's meticulously built brick by brick.
I love that phrase, brick by brick.
Right. So welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you are here with us today. Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at a comprehensive guide that reveals how you take a tiny, fragile, few 100-gram newborn and actually construct a courageous adult.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that even if you don't own a dog and, have literally no intention of ever getting one, the psychological transition from a highly vulnerable infant to an unshakably confident adult is it's a brilliant study in developmental psychology.
It really is.
Because courage in this breed, it isn't some magical genetic inheritance that just switches on. It is constructed through hundreds of small, entirely ordinary experiences that actually shape the animal's brain.
So to understand how that works, we have to look at the environment where those first neurological pathways are formed.
Exactly. The blueprint of boldness, essentially.
Right, the raw materials. Because the sources point out that this confidence building, it actually starts before you even bring the dog home. It starts in the whelping box with the breeder.
It absolutely does. If you're picking a puppy, the environment they were born into matters immensely. A responsible breeder is actively prioritizing early temperament development right alongside physical health.
So they aren't just making sure the puppies are fed.
No. Long before a puppy is separated from its litter mates, their brain is learning what the world sounds like and feels like. We're talking about breeders doing gentle, intentional handling, touching their paws, rubbing their ears.
Getting them used to human contact early.
Right. And they are playing recordings of thunderstorms, vacuum cleaners, even dropping metal pans, just to get the puppies used to certain noises.
Oh, dropping pans.
Yeah. They're laying down a neurological foundation that basically says, loud noises happen and you survive them.
That makes me think of, like, casting a movie. When you are standing there picking a puppy from a litter, you shouldn't just be casting for cute.
Oh, definitely not.
Or, the smallest or the one that looks the most fragile. You have to cast for character. You are looking for resilience.
Exactly. The source material emphasizes looking for the puppy that shows curiosity, one that is willing to approach you, and this is crucial, one that has a quick recovery time after a mild startle.
A quick recovery time.
Yeah, that recovery time is the golden ticket. If a puppy hears a loud clap and jumps, well, that's just normal biological self-preservation.
Right, I would jump too.
Exactly. But what happens 10 seconds later? Do they cower in the corner and shape for 5 minutes, or do they, shake off their coat and trot over to investigate the noise?
They reset.
Yes. That recovery time shows a nervous system that is capable of regulating itself. You want the nervous system that resets quickly.
Okay, so let's say you've selected that resilient puppy and it's time to bring them home. Preparing your house requires a complete shift in perspective. You have to, literally get down on the floor and look at the world from 6 inches high.
It's a whole different world down there.
It really is.
Yeah.
You have to think in genuinely microscopic scale. It means securing a 2-inch gap under your sofa where a tiny puppy could wedge themselves in a panic.
Which happens a lot.
Yeah, and it means blocking off stairs that literally look like Mount Everest to a 2-pound creature.
Yeah.
You have to scan the floor for tiny objects, like a dropped staple or a bead. Hazards that wouldn't even register for a golden retriever owner are life or death safety issues here.
Right, which brings us to the first 24 hours in that new environment. The sources note that Chihuahuas bond incredibly intensely.
They really do.
Leaving their litter mates is a massive adjustment, and they were going to vocalize that distress. Now, the common, old school dog advice is to put the puppy in a crate in the kitchen, turn off the lights, and just let them cry it out so they learn independence.
Oh, I've heard that so many times.
Right, but with a breed this small, that physical isolation is genuinely dangerous.
Because they can't regulate their own body heat at that size.
Exactly the issue. They have very little body fat and a massive surface area to mass ratio. If you put them in a chilly kitchen alone, their core temperature can drop dangerously low.
That is terrifying.
It is. They need a genuinely warm, draft-free, secure space placed close to the owner. That physical warmth and proximity to the owner in the first few days builds the very first layer of trust.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
Yeah, here's the delicate balancing act. Because they bond so intensely, a Chihuahua can very quickly attach to just one particular person in the household.
The classic one-person dog stereotype.
Exactly, which is actually something you really want to avoid. If you allow that hyper-narrow attachment to form, it almost always leads to severe separation distress later on.
Because when that one person leaves the room, the dog's entire sense of safety vanishes.
You got it. To prevent this, you have to actively encourage positive interactions. Feeding, playtime with multiple family members and visitors right from the start.
Yeah.
You are distributing the emotional load.
So it builds a resilient, generalized sense of security, rather than a fragile, single-point dependency.
Perfectly said.
Wait, I'm struggling to square this circle, though. You're telling me we need to build resilience and expose them to multiple people, but we just established they are so incredibly tiny that a single stare is a mountain. A draft can freeze them, and they are practically made of glass in a world full of heavy boots.
It sounds contradictory, I know.
My instinct, and I think any reasonable person's instinct, would absolutely be to just put them in a baby sling, carry them everywhere, and shield them from everything. How is keeping them safely tucked away in my arms a threat to their development?
This raises an important question, and it is what we call the protection paradox. It is the single biggest trap owners fall into. We have to separate physical recklessness from emotional stunting.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
Well, obviously you don't put a 2-pound puppy on the ground at a crowded outdoor festival where they could be stepped on. That is physical recklessness. But if your default response to the world is to carry the puppy everywhere and shield it from all novel experiences, the puppy never learns that the world is inherently safe.
They just learn that the ground is a terrifying lava field they aren't allowed to touch.
Precisely. Confidence requires agency. A dog builds confidence by navigating a space on its own 4 legs, investigating a smell, approaching a weird object, realizing it isn't a threat, and then just moving on.
And if you remove their agency by carrying them,
The gap in their brain where confidence should be developing is instead filled with fearfulness. Shielding them doesn't create a safe dog. It creates an adult dog that reacts defensively to absolutely everything because everything is unfamiliar and therefore, a mortal threat.
so think of their brain in those first 4 months like wet cement. You can draw whatever you want in it. You can write big dogs are safe, loud buses are fine, strangers are friendly. But right around 16 weeks, that cement dries.
Yes, that is a great analogy.
And whatever was carved into it stays, and if you try to carve something new into it later, you have to use a jackhammer.
That is the perfect way to look at the socialization window. It is a biological timeline, and it is shockingly short. It is largely concentrated in the first 3 to 4 months of life. It is the critical software update for their brain.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because that window overlaps directly with the puppy's vaccination series. This creates a massive dilemma for the owner.
It really does.
You can't wait for the vaccines to be fully complete to start socializing, because by the time they are fully vaccinated at, say, 16 or 18 weeks, the wet cement is already dry, the window has closed.
Which is why the method has to be incredibly strategic.
Mm.
The goal is to carry the young puppy out into the world to experience sights and sounds, but without letting their paws touch high-traffic public ground where the risk of parvo is high.
So you take them on a literal tour of the world from the safety of a puppy sling or a stroller.
Exactly. You sit on a bench outside a busy supermarket. You go to a cafe with outdoor seating. You let them absorb the ambient noise of traffic, the smell of coffee, the sight of bicycles going by.
And the source guide gets incredibly specific about what they need to see. You have to expose them to people of different ages, different appearances, people using wheelchairs or walkers.
All of it.
And the guide specifically calls out people wearing hats and people carrying umbrellas.
Yes, the umbrella is a classic trigger.
Right. If you think about it from the perspective of a tiny animal, an open umbrella fundamentally changes a human's silhouette. It makes them look like an alien creature.
It really does.
If a Chihuahua doesn't see an umbrella during that wet cement phase, they will bark at every umbrella they see for the next 15 years.
It's so true. And they also desperately need to learn dog language. which means calm, controlled introductions to gentle, non-boisterous adult dogs.
So not just tossing them into a chaotic dog park.
Oh, absolutely not. In a controlled setting, like a friend's living room with a trusted, vaccinated older dog, they need to learn how to sniff and be sniffed without getting trampled.
And we absolutely have to talk about kids, because a tiny dog and an energetic kid is a recipe for disaster if it's not managed with strict rules.
It's a very delicate dynamic.
You don't avoid children, but they have to be intensely supervised.
Right, the mechanics of how a child interacts with a toy breed are critical. You have to teach kids how to offer a flat hand for sniffing and enforce a strict rule of absolutely no sudden grabbing or picking up the puppy.
Because the dog is so physically small.
Exactly. A child tripping and falling near them or grabbing them from behind, it triggers a massive fear response. A single bad startle from a child during this window can create a permanent neural pathway of fear toward all children.
It's intense to think about how every single interaction is a permanent data point for that puppy's brain.
Every single one.
But expanding their mind is just one half of the job. You still have to manage the unique physical realities of a tiny body in daily life. Let's look at house training. The core behavioral principles are the same as any dog, but a Chihuahua has a microscopically tiny bladder.
Is pure anatomy. They simply cannot physically hold the volume of liquid that a Labrador can. It requires much more frequent opportunities to go outside. It takes longer, not because they are stubborn or, unintelligent, but because their physical capacity just requires more repetitions to build the habit.
That's where crate training becomes such a vital tool, right? Not just for potty training, but for their mental health. Giving them a den-like space, a secure area that is entirely theirs, builds that independence we were talking about earlier.
It's essential. If you are constantly holding them while you watch TV, while you work, while you cook, you are manufacturing separation anxiety.
And while they are exploring the house, you are inevitably going to deal with puppy biting. They all do it, right? They explore the world with their mouths. But the strict rule here is absolutely no physical or punishment-based corrections.
None. Zero.
So what does this all mean for the average owner? How do you actually stop it then? If they bite my finger and I can't correct them, what's the mechanism for teaching them that human skin is fragile?
You withdraw your attention. When the puppy bites too hard, you let out a high-pitched ouch, you stop playing, and you literally turn your back for 10 seconds.
Just ignore them.
Yes. You are teaching them that biting makes the fun stop. Then you calmly redirect them to an appropriate chew toy. Harsh physical punishments like tapping their nose or rolling them over, they completely destroy the trust you are working so hard to build.
It teaches a fragile animal that human hands are unpredictable and dangerous.
Exactly.
Speaking of unpredictable dangers, the gear you use to walk them is a huge factor. The source specifically notes that you should use a well-fitted harness, never a collar. And this goes back to anatomy again.
Yes, Chihuahuas have extreme tracheal sensitivity.
Because the trachea is supported by these tiny, C-shaped rings of cartilage. If a Chihuahua pulls on a neck collar or if you accidentally jerk the leash, those cartilage rings can literally collapse. It causes permanent respiratory damage.
It's heartbreaking when it happens, which is why you introduce a soft body harness very early on with lots of treats, so they accept the feeling of it before you ever go on a real walk.
Right. And while we are on the topic of being outside, training a reliable recall, teaching them to come immediately when called is essential. However, off-leash freedom in unsecured public areas is never advisable.
Never. The environmental hazards for a dog this small are just too severe. A hawk, a loose, aggressive dog, or a fast-moving bicycle can turn fatal in seconds.
It's a totally different risk profile. And inside the house, the hazards are different, but just as real. You have to protect their developing joints. Letting a tiny puppy jump off a tall bed is like a human jumping off a one-story roof.
The impact on their shoulders and knees is immense.
You have to train them to use ramps or padded steps for furniture. You even have to train the humans in the house to literally sit down on the floor before they hold the puppy, purely to prevent drop injuries if the dog suddenly wriggles.
It's all about risk management. And we haven't even touched on the invisible internal hazard hypoglycemia.
Right, low blood sugar.
Yes. Very small toy breeds are highly susceptible to this, especially in those first few months of rapid growth.
I always hear about small dogs getting weak or lethargic, but what is actually happening in their body? Why is a Chihuahua prone to this, but a Spaniel isn't?
It comes down to liver capacity. The liver stores glycogen, which is the body's reserve fuel. A tiny Chihuahua puppy has a liver so incredibly small that it simply doesn't have the storage capacity for glycogen.
So there's no backup tank.
Exactly. If they go too long without eating or if they burn too much energy playing, their fuel tank doesn't just get low, it hits absolute zero.
Wow.
And the brain doesn't have the glucose it needs to function, leading to severe neurological glitches like disorientation, weakness, and eventually seizures.
So the fix is literally just keeping the fuel line running constantly.
Exactly. They require frequent small meals throughout the day rather than infrequent large ones just to maintain stable blood sugar. It underscores why regular vet visits are crucial to track their growth, body condition, and, overall energy levels.
It is a massive paradox to master. You have to perfectly synthesize physical fragility with emotional robustness. You protect the physical joints with ramps. You protect the blood sugar with tiny meals. You protect the trachea with a harness.
But you absolutely challenge their mind.
Yes. You let them explore. You let them learn. You let them experience the world on their own 4 feet. You protect the body, but you do not coddle the brain.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is incredibly hard for people to do this because society has basically trained us to treat them like living stuffed animals.
It's funny you say that because when I told a friend we were researching Chihuahua development for this deep dive, their immediate reaction was, "Oh, you mean those nervous, shaky little purse dogs?"
Yep, there it is.
It's almost baked into our cultural understanding that they are naturally anxious, untrainable, and meant to be carried around like a fashion accessory. The public perception of this breed is so completely backwards from the reality in the source material, it's actively harming their development.
And that is the absolute tragedy of the purse dog culture. Let's look at that stereotype of them being naturally nervous. Historically, if you look at their origins in Mexico, their inherited temperament leans bold, alert, and confident.
So they aren't born shaking.
No. The nervous shaky stereotype is almost entirely a human-made problem. It is a product of inadequate early socialization, not an unavoidable breed trait. When a dog is never allowed to walk on the ground and explore, their nervous system just stays in a state of high alert.
Which ties right into the myth that they are too small to socialize. People think, oh, they're too delicate for a puppy class.
It is actually the exact opposite. It is infinitely more important for a toy breed to be socialized than a large breed.
Right.
A Mastiff doesn't need to worry about being stepped on, but a Chihuahua lives in a world of giants. They need robust socialization precisely to prevent the fearfulness that stems from living in a world much larger than they are.
I also hear people say that because they are so small, they don't really need formal obedience training. If they misbehave, you can just scoop them up.
Oh, that is doing a massive disservice to their intelligence. These are highly intelligent, observant dogs. They thrive on structured learning.
They want to work.
Yes, consistent, positive training builds their confidence because it teaches them how to successfully interact with the human world. It gives them a job and a way to communicate. When you just scoop them up to solve a problem, you're denying them the chance to learn coping skills.
And what about other dogs? The instinct to keep a 5-pound dog completely away from large dogs to keep them safe seems logical, but based on what we've unpacked, that has to be a recipe for disaster.
It absolutely is. Avoiding large dogs entirely during that wet cement phase guarantees that your Chihuahua will view all large dogs as terrifying predators later in life.
And how does that fear show up?
That fear usually manifests as defensive aggression, barking and lunging at big dogs on walks, which is incredibly dangerous. They desperately need controlled, well-supervised introductions to gentle, calm, big dogs so they learn that size does not equal threat.
It is wild how treating them like a delicate toy instead of a real functional dog is the root cause of almost every single behavioral issue people complain about.
It really is.
It all comes back to that paradox of protecting the physical body while challenging the mind. So as we wrap up this deep dive, the overarching lesson here for you is brilliantly clear. That courage, that legendary Chihuahua bravery standing up to a Great Dane, it isn't magic.
Nope.
It isn't just genetic luck. It is constructed through your patience, your consistency, and finding that perfect balance of exposure and safety. Every single minor choice you make, from the breeder you choose, to laying down a ramp by the sofa, to buying a harness instead of a collar, to sitting near someone with an umbrella in the park, it all adds up.
Every single interaction.
You are laying down the neurological bricks to build a fearless adult. It is a joy to discover just how complex and resilient these tiny creatures truly are, and we are so glad you joined us to unpack the science and the psychology behind it all today.
I'd like to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We spent this entire deep dive exploring how a Chihuahua's famously fierce, anxious, or bold personality is largely a human-made construct of its early environment, rather than just its DNA.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how many other traits in our pets, or perhaps even in ourselves, do we wrongly assume are just the way we are, when they are really just a reflection of how we were introduced to the world?
Wow. Something to think about the next time you see a 5-pound dog staring down a mastiff. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.